All right, team, we have a special treat today for you. James Altucher joins us now. He's an American hedge fund manager, author, podcaster, entrepreneur. He's founded over 20 companies, and he's host of the James Altucher podcast. Mr. Altucher, hello, sir.
Buck, so happy to be on your show. I've been listening ever since back when you were at the Blaze. How long ago was that? That was a while ago.
That is a high compliment. That's like, I left the Blaze 4 years ago. So, yeah, and I started almost 10 years ago now. So it's been a while, man. But thank you so much for joining us. I know you, like me, are in NYC. Your background book selection that I can see here is more impressive than mine, which indicates greater square footage in your apartment. So lucky you, because I'm going stir crazy over here. But how are you? First off, how are you doing in lockdown?
You know, for me personally, I don't like going outside. I don't like traveling. I had all sorts of trips scheduled for March and April, and I was very happy to cancel them. I was going to Austin, Houston, California, Florida, DC, Winnipeg. All the trips were canceled. I'm so grateful. But I do every day, I don't know what it is. I just, just like you, I've been reporting and covering this economic lockdown and, of course, the virus. And it's just horrible, the effect on society. It's so much suffering from, of course, the virus, but also the economic shutdown, which affects 300 million people. And this is the world's biggest economy, 7 billion people around the world. And so, I think we all, no matter how we are personally, we all feel the herd anxiety of nobody's working, nobody's producing, everyone's scared, everyone's anxious, and no one could defend themselves from that. No matter rich or poor, sick or healthy, you're going to feel the anxiety of the world in moments like this.
How do you think our leadership so far has responded to this? Where do you think the balance is? There's obviously the virus and the economy. It feels like there's been a shift to the recognition that the economy can't just be something that we stick in the deep freezer until we decide to thaw it out. What do you think about what we've done so far with this nationwide lockdown? And, are you following what Europe has done, what different cases have been like there with at the nation state level, what Sweden has done in their approach? How do you gauge all that?
Yeah, Buck, it's a good question. I've been following everything on. I've actually talked to members of the Federal Reserve. The other day I was talking to the deputy chairman of the St. Louis Fed. I've talked to economists like Tyler Cohen from Marginal Revolution, other economists. I've talked to the top epidemiologists and immunologists at Imperial College, which was the first one out with all the kind of doom and gloom scenarios and mathematical models. So I've been a little all over the place, just trying to figure it out for my own audience. And I think the economy is not a light switch. You can't turn it off and then turn it on 3 months later, expecting it's gonna be just as glowing as it was before. We've done something disastrous here. And you mentioned a lot of countries. Every single country, and quite frankly, every single state in the United States has had a different strategy for dealing with this. And you look at countries like Sweden or the Czech Republic or Taiwan, 3 different countries, 3 different strategies. None of them did a lockdown. All of them have their economy returning full force and didn't need, the full stimulus that we needed. And I think it's a shame that we did this economic lockdown when there was absolutely no data to support it. Sure. By the way, and this is sort of sacrilegious to say, I'm not even so sure there's data to support social distancing. Like you mentioned Sweden, maybe it's just that they naturally social distance because they don't really like each other that much, but they didn't social distance and they're coming back fine. It's not like they were great and it's not like they were bad. They weren't the worst in Europe, but they weren't the best. But I think this pandemic kind of has its natural course. I mean, you probably remember, like in early February, some of the initial mathematical models were even saying up to 140 million deaths worldwide, which was insane. Like, this is Singapore in total had, I don't know, less than 1,000. And look, you have to say this again, it's like religion. Every death is horrible. You have to acknowledge that. But, people die every day from all sorts of causes. So just setting that aside for a second, it does appear that even the early data from all the initial countries that we were in, that the virus was in, the early data was suggesting this virus doubles exponentially 3 or 4 times and then starts to peak and flatten. There was no way it was going to have a 2% fatality rate worldwide. And now all these recent tests, Santa Clara, California, Chelsea in Massachusetts, other tests are showing that the infectiousness of this is probably 50 to 85 times worse than we thought, or greater than we thought, which means that the ultimate fatality rate is much lower. The higher the infection rate, the lower the fatality rate. We're probably looking at a 0.1 to 0.3% fatality rate. In other words, a flu, similar to a flu season. Of course, you're not allowed to say also this is similar to the flu. It's not similar to the flu. The flu affects children and kills children. This is affecting elderly. It's 2 different demographic groups. So what that means is on the hospitals is that if you end up on a ventilator from this, if you're elderly, you end up spending more days on the ventilator. Hence, if the hospitals were going to be overwhelmed, it could have caused a problem. But obviously, they weren't overwhelmed, and so that didn't happen. And now they're saying, well, it's because we enacted social distancing principles, but we don't really know. And some states that didn't really do anything have barely any cases or deaths. So, to treat every state as if, oh my gosh, you're not even allowed to go to the grocery store, or else you're going to die. That's just ridiculous. And now the question is, we're not coming back to a new normal. We're coming back to a new abnormal. This has never happened before. And the stimulus has been trillions of dollars more than we even did in the massive stimulus in 2008, 2009.
Yeah. So what do you foresee that doing, James? What do you see that doing to the economy? I mean, we're now seeing hundreds of billions of dollars thrown into congressional spending bills. We can't even keep up with it. I mean, it was a few $1 trillion, and now they've added, it was going to be 250 billion, and then it was 300 billion, and now it's close to half a trillion. 400 something billion was the final tally. And Chuck Schumer's already saying there's going to be a part 3 or a part 4 to this whole thing. At what point how do we know as a government, as a country, we've spent too much money? What does that feel like? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's going to be a before. It's not like in 2008, 2009, where there wasn't a sudden before and after. Like, it wasn't like the economy was bad in 2008, and then as soon as the stimulus was passed, and it was good. The economy never was closed then. So the economy went from bad to having some stimulus to then becoming good. But right now, we're all being forced, almost literally at gunpoint. Like, they'll arrest you if you go outside without a mask or whatever, don't obey proper social distancing. So sooner or later, they're going to reopen the economy all across the U.S. And then at the same time, the stimulus is going to be hitting. We've never had an experience like that where everybody sort of walks out of their home and sees daylight and money is just showering down from the sky. And of course, there's a risk of hyperinflation. But right now we're in a deflationary period because there's zero demand. So the price of pretty much everything now is between 20 to 100% below what it was. So we're in a massive deflationary scenario that's been forced on us, but it's going to change as soon as we leave and as soon as the economy reopens. We don't really know what prices are going to look like. Now, to your point on a macroeconomic level, the fortunate thing we have, it's both fortunate and unfortunate, but there's such huge demand for the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is the flight to safety for the wealthy in China, the wealthy in the Middle East, the wealthy in Europe, that keeps naturally our interest rates low, and it keeps people buying, other countries buying our debt. So that sort of avoids too much inflationary pressure. But an economy is only as good as the goods and services it produces. People pay for those goods and services in dollars. And that's why the dollar is valuable, because it buys U.S. goods and services. But ultimately, if you're just throwing $1 trillion a month out there and you're not producing any goods and services, sooner or later, everyone's going to look around and say, well, why are we giving so much of our currency to the dollar? The dollar is sort of worthless. Now, what will avoid that, the sooner the economy reopens, the better. every month we wait, the economy comes closer and closer to the twilight zone, where we don't really understand what's going to happen next. If the economy were to open this morning, we can probably start to guess what industries are going to fail, what industries are going to succeed, and we'll come back to some sort of normal. The short-term stimulus will kick in. That's the direct to your bank account $1,200 checks that are going to everybody, and the PPP loans that are going to small businesses. That's the short-term stimulus. The long-term stimulus is the Fed rate cuts, and that'll kick in, let's say, within 12 months. So we have short and long-term stimulus that will beef up the economy, and the hope is that we didn't miscalculate and rely on the kindness of others too much to support our dollar, and hopefully the economy comes back intact.
James, I want to come back and talk about how this situation is changing, not just obviously the economy, but life going forward. We mentioned, the new abnormal. Well, what's and I want to also take a look back and see what have we learned about life, perhaps that we used to think was true that was not. I saw a thread you had on this that I thought was really interesting. We'll come back with James Altucher, podcaster, author, entrepreneur, investor, in just a second. Okay, we're back with James Altucher. He is a hedge fund manager, author, podcaster. His book "Choose Yourself." Many books, many podcasts, many things. Yeah. Mr. Altucher, jack of all trades, a James of all trades,
dilettante of everything, master of nothing.
Yeah, well, we have the same first name technically, so that speaks well to you. So let me ask about what. You had a thread I found really interesting, and I think some of this audience is really going to agree with it, and they're probably going to disagree with some of it, but that's great. We like to spark ideas here and spark debate. Myths that we have learned as a function of this lockdown, myths about ourselves and about society. What are some of the myths? The top ones. I know you had a whole bunch.
Well, I think there was this myth that we have to be in a location to work or to learn. Like, look, it's clear now the tide has come in, and the first group of institutions standing naked are institutions of higher learning, colleges. Like, colleges were charging $70,000 a year, and suddenly they said, "Oh, by the way, you could just go home and learn by yourselves, but we're keeping the money. Don't worry about it. You'll get your degree, but just go home and play with your little friends, bother your parents, get your grandparents sick. Get out of the dorm rooms, by the way, because we don't want your petri dish of disease infecting our dorm rooms. But don't ask for your rent back, because that money is ours now. Business 101. We took that money from you, and possession is 9/10 of the law." So I don't know, like, everybody's leaving college and they're supposed to take courses online. I've seen some of these online courses. I would rather take a course for $10 on Coursera or LinkedIn Learning or Khan Academy. Like, why did anybody pay $70,000 a year for 4 years to learn, to get a degree that says, "Oh, I learned East Asian studies"? Like, it's ridiculous.
Well, they're really credentialing. They're credentialing programs, which is especially, I think that's been better known for a long time about some of the more flimsy master's programs in the humanities. But now people are realizing, well, it's like an arms race, right? If everybody has a 4-year liberal arts degree of some kind, the value in the marketplace of just having that degree is not the same as it used to be.
No, I mean, in this already, you're seeing, skills and ideas are the currency of the 21st century, not a degree from whatever, school. And I'm even talking right up to Harvard. Like, Harvard, there's always a credentialing where there's some status thing, so other people who think that they're higher status will hire you. But look, Harvard, they just took, they have a $41 billion endowment. Until they were kind of caught red-handed, they took $9 million from the last stimulus package, supposedly to give to students needing financial assistance.
Yeah, Trump says they're going to give it back, by the way. He said that last.
Guess what the head of the Harvard endowment makes per year? He makes, guess what, $9 million. Oh, they took payment protection program. Let's protect the pay of one employee, the guy who runs all of our money. So it's just, that's a big myth. And then there's the myth that you can't work remotely and be productive. right now, I think anything with the word remote in it is going to be supercharged. And there's both upside and downside to that. We're going to be able to be more flexible about our work hours, more flexible about where we work, more flexible about travel. But at the same time, you have to ask, what's going to happen to commercial real estate? And by the way, not that we have to care that much, but everything in the economy is linked. So WeWork clearly is going to go out of business after this. Like they are bankrupt, and SoftBank pulled the plug on funding. So WeWork is the biggest leasee. I don't know what you call it. They rent the most floors in New York City of any other company. So if you own a skyscraper in New York City and you're heavily leveraged and you have to make your own mortgage payments, and WeWork suddenly disappears and they rented 8 floors in your building, you might be out of business. You can't just replace them the next day with a renter. So, and then there's all the restaurant storefronts. Not every restaurant is coming back to business in urban areas and maybe all over the country. So this, 10 million restaurants, on average, they had 16 days of cash in the bank. Restaurants are out of business in this country right now. And so now, yes, they'll be helped by the stimulus package, but guess what? The stimulus package, at least initially, went to the Shake Shacks and Ruth's Chris Steakhouses of the world, and this mom and pop small restaurants are out of business. I know because all the GoFund. I own a local storefront business in New York City. I see all the local GoFundMe's being, from the employees of all the different restaurants and businesses. Restaurants, Buck, that you and I have even been to, and they're all out of business. So what are going to happen to those buildings who are no longer getting the $15,000 to $20,000 in rent a month that those restaurants were giving? So commercial real estate is going to collapse, and we're going to have like a mini financial collapse after we reopen the economy, just on the basis of that. So, I think a lot of things are going to be both good in that, we'll reopen the economy. People will have an opportunity to really decide what they want to do. They've probably changed habits, so they didn't spend as much. They didn't go out as much. Hopefully they'll start spending and going out again, but some people won't, and that might be a good thing for them. But the other thing is, it's going to be quickly everything that was going to eventually happen, like the demise of colleges.
Yeah, they've accelerated. They've accelerated the cleaning out of a lot of the economy in ways that's going to be very tough. Everybody, James Altucher, podcaster, author. Check out his show, The James Altucher Show, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, James, so we were talking about some of the myths, some of the changes in society. I want to ask you a broad question, then we can drill down into some more specifics here. It seems to me that there can be an overall reaction to what we're seeing at the national level of either, wow, the government is really actually quite incompetent, pretty much across the board. Yes, the government can spend a whole lot of money, but that comes with its own costs, quite clearly. But beyond that, the government is not some all-seeing, all-knowing protector that keeps you safe and warm at night. So there's some people that might have a more individualistic anti-government perspective, and then others are going to say, oh, look at this. When things get really tough, now everybody all of a sudden needs the big government to swoop in and save them. And, oh, why can't we have a UBI, a universal basic income, if the government can just write checks? Why can't we give everybody a $25 minimum wage if the government can just write checks? How do you see that balance playing out?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic because somehow or other, this virus became so incredibly partisan. Like before Trump even mentioned it, a lot of people were talking about the anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine. Like Elon Musk had mentioned it. The CDC was looking into it as early as 2005 that hydroxychloroquine might have an effect on SARS. And of course, in Africa, where it's a powerful anti-malarial drug, people were saying it also has some antiviral properties. And this is a drug that's been around since the 1940s. It's FDA approved. It's with medical supervision. It's always been safe. And as soon as Trump mentioned it, and by the way, I'm not saying people should take this drug or not. I'm just noticing that as soon as Trump mentioned it, everybody who was anti-Trump was saying hydroxychloroquine will kill you. And everybody who was pro-Trump was saying, we found the cure. So it's really disturbing to me that such an important issue that's now affecting billions of people. And I'm not just talking about the virus, but also the economic shutdown, because every % loss in GDP costs lives, and that has to be factored into these decisions. Everything has become so partisan. If Trump wanted to keep the economy closed, I bet you the opposite side keep it, open it up. We've got to open it up. If Trump wanted to, when Trump put on the China ban, they were going to make a ban of bans. And by the way, I'm not saying everything Trump did was great and everything the Democrats did was bad and vice versa. I just wish it hadn't gotten partisan, because I think what happened is that we had all of these bogus mathematical models made by healthcare officials who, by the way, didn't really seem to understand math very well.
And the models were crap, right? Wait, can I just, the models were crap.
Yeah.
Where there's no doubt now. I mean, if you look back at them, and yet we're supposed to skip past that. These models were used as the primary data point to justify the lockdowns. Why isn't it relevant if the models were garbage? Because they were garbage.
They were garbage, and models are not always supposed to be correct. They're models. They're not scientific law. And it's like saying in 2006, well, my mathematical model said, mortgages, there'll never be more than 1% of mortgages defaulting. That's what all the models said in 2006. And that's what led to the housing crash in 2008. So, models aren't supposed to be correct, but there was just basic mathematical sixth grade principles that were not followed in many of these models. Like, they kept saying this virus is exponential, and it was. But exponential, when you have a limited population, doesn't mean exponential forever. It means you have to model how many times it doubles before it starts to flatten. That's called exponential with a sigmoidal curve. I have a math background. And that's what happens in an exponentially growing situation with a bounded population. We were bounded by the number of people in the population. We were bounded by the demographics of the virus. It turns out it mostly affects severely the elderly. We were bounded by demographics, by temperatures. For all we know, we were bounded by pre-existing conditions. We were bounded by herd immunity. So we don't know all the boundaries, but it certainly was not exponential. So every model, 100% of the models were wrong. Even on March 25th, the model that the White House is still currently using was predicting 60,000 hospitalizations in New York City by April 1st, 6 days later. 6 days later, there were only 12,000 hospitalizations. How could they be 80% wrong in 6 days? What kind of math are they using? They're using like a calculator.
But I mean, to your point about
they're using an abacus.
Yeah, I mean, to the point about the partisanship too, it was, as soon as this came up, and I've seen that particular loss, there are many of the IHME models when you look at them, and they're wrong not just a little bit in advance, they're wrong day of and continue to be wrong. And people will dismiss this who predictably, somehow the models that justified the lockdown fell into the anti-Trump camp. And so people that don't like the president, when you point out these models are wrong, jump all over you and say that grandma wants to die. Meanwhile, the models are wrong, right? So, I mean, you can't claim to be somebody who cares about facts and numbers and logic, and then when this happens, just dismiss it because you don't like it.
Right, if I'll post something, and this is a third rail. If I post something like, "Oh, the economy needs to reopen," because whether or not you even believe in the models, it's clear we quote unquote flattened the curve. Like the whole purpose of flattening the curve was so the hospitals wouldn't be overwhelmed. The hospitals are empty, right? So in 48 states, the hospitals are completely empty. In New York City, they're clearly not overwhelmed. And we never used the Javits Center or the USS Comfort or the tents. And I visited the tents in Central Park. They were empty. And but if you mention, the economy should reopen, people will say, "Oh, you believe in the stock market over your grandma's death?" And I'm like, no, the economy pays for healthcare. You don't have doctors and ventilators without an economy. They're intertwined. You can't shut down an economy. What you've done is you've killed the economy. And maybe I'm not even going to call it the stimulus package. The Band-Aid package that has been put together is keeping the patient alive on life support, which is the economy. But we don't know if it's going to stimulate because we have to see if this patient can even get off of life support now. The economy has been really hurt and damaged. And, again, if you say, "Oh, well, maybe we should reopen," and people start yelling at me, one person who I really respect, a really smart guy, called me and said, I've been calling this since the beginning. I'm kind of an expert. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're a TV show producer. You're not an expert. And he's like, well, what about all the people who are going to die? And I'm like, well, what about the people we know it's a fact. when the economy suffers, there's more suicides, there's more domestic violence, there's more child abuse, there's more deaths from stress and mental health. Not to forget also, there's collateral fatalities. When you shut down the hospitals to elective procedures, well, guess what's elective? If you have stage 3 liver cancer and you need to get a test to find out if you've gone from stage 3 to stage 4, which you're now terminal, that was elective. You couldn't get that test. You still can't get that test in 49 of the 50 states. So you can't tell me this doesn't have collateral fatalities that are much, much bigger than what we've now seen as the coronavirus fatalities.
What do you think should be done? Like, explain to me, if I made you, and it feels like everyone these days, at least on Twitter, thinks that they are the coronavirus czar, right? Like, everyone's got all the answers all the time. And if you point out that they were wrong yesterday, they yell that, you just want grandma to die. This is the Bush lied, babies died of the coronavirus epidemic. And I would just want to know what you think, and I'm asking, right? I want to know what you think should be done now in order to get things back up and running. What does that look like? And how do we, as a society, on an individual level, what should we be prepared for to be different and maybe not different? Like, where should we just recognize that there are risks in life and we got to be willing to take them?
Right. So two good questions. So if it was up to me, and of course it isn't, but I have written to as many people as I know in the current administration that I could. But if it was up to me, and this is not being insensitive about coronavirus, I might add, but the coronavirus has already peaked in at least 48 or 49 of the 50 states. It's also peaked in New York City. I would reopen the economy immediately. I would, and now we have the examples of other countries that have successfully reopened, or it seems like successfully reopened. I'd probably keep masks like many of the Asian countries do, not for 100% of the time, but if you're in crowds. I would quarantine, obviously, anybody who has symptoms, but you're going to find out after this is all said and done that 100 million people got infected, and most of them were asymptomatic. And by the way, most of them did not spread the virus. Everyone says asymptomatic people spread the virus. That is true only if you're like spending 6 hours a day with asymptomatic people who are rubbing themselves all over you. So unless you're like hanging out in a whorehouse.
That's not enough social distancing, by the way. Not enough social distancing. You can't have people rub themselves all over you. That's a no-no. Dr. Birx told me.
Right. You got to stay at least 6 inches apart from someone who's asymptomatic. And the reality is we don't even know about social distancing. So, but keep the mask, because if you have symptoms and you cough on someone, they're going to get it. But here's the only thing we know about spreading this disease. If you're around someone with severe symptoms and you're around them quite a bit, you're probably going to get it, and you might get severe symptoms as well, which is why, sadly, the healthcare workers who are treating the patients with severe symptoms are also now getting coronavirus.
Well, this is like an epidemiologist friend of mine, because I do have some, an infectious disease specialist, actually. I mean, same idea, same thing. I mean, he told me that we always forget about two things when we're talking about transmissibility and all that there is duration of exposure and degree of exposure. So this is what you're saying. Right. How long are you in the room with somebody, and are they like pretty healthy but have like a little bit of COVID that's coming out a little bit in some of, if they cough or something, or are they just like, a COVID machine spewing it out right into your face because you're a doctor or a nurse trying to tend to them? That doesn't just affect the chances of you getting the virus, according to this doc I talked to. It can affect the severity of the virus you get, which makes sense.
And Buck, it's not just anecdotal. And this is where the media disturbs me, when you see all the headlines in all the different major media outlets about, Imperial College says there might be 2.2 million deaths now in the UK, blah, blah, blah. Well, at Imperial College also, there was a study done and research released, like maybe it was 3 weekends ago, where they did all this testing, at least on mice, where they basically showed exactly what your friend said. They did every configuration of, let's give this mouse severe symptoms and put them right next to this other mouse. Okay, now let's do asymptomatic, put it next to this. Asymptomatic, put it next to an older mouse. And it's exactly what you would expect. The worst case scenario is someone who has a lot of symptoms is basically coughing on you for 6 hours and you have pre-existing conditions. That's the worst case scenario. And all the way in the spectrum to, an asymptomatic person passes you in the street, you're not going to get it. Oh, but it stays in the air for 27 feet. So what? Just because I breathe in a nanoparticle of coronavirus doesn't mean I'm gonna
Well,
end up in a
but so
ventilator a
you know,
few
you got
days
people
later.
in the city who are now jogging. They're jogging with masks on. I saw this and I was just
Yeah.
thinking, this is first of all, I feel like someone's going to get some form of like self CO2 poisoning or something. This is crazy to be you're jogging with a mask on. I mean, that first of all, there's no. I
Yeah,
don't even like
more people
walking
are
with a
gonna
mask
die
on.
from right. More people are gonna die from jogging in New York City than die from coronavirus. Like, and again, I don't mean to make light of it. It's a serious. It's as serious as if I was talking about 2 million people a year die from diarrhea. That's serious too. And someone said to me, "Oh, but diarrhea is not infectious." Are you kidding me? Do you want to stand next to someone with diarrhea? Let's see if you get it as well. I don't mean to be gross, but so I would reopen things instantly. And by the way, if you're elderly, you could stay in or not. Here's your chances of dying if you're elderly: 2 in 100,000 in the U.S. So again, like the flu, and I'm not saying this is like the flu; it's a third rail, but there's 7,500 deaths a day in the United States. If anything, we actually don't know how many deaths have been happening now because so many people have not been allowed to go to the doctor or the hospital. But and all the numbers like suicides are underreported and so on. But you look at like mental health hotlines in Indiana, they have a hotline 211. They used to get 1,000 calls a day. Now they're getting 25,000 calls a day, and it's mostly suicide related. The Bronx in New York City, uh, they've gone up sixfold the number of calls they're getting about reporting child abuse situations. So there are horrible ramifications of what's been going on. So to stop those ramifications, to stop this extra 6x child abuse, to stop the suicides, to stop collateral fatalities from people who can't go to the hospital, you have to reopen the economy and get people's stress levels back to normal, their mental health back to normal. Coronavirus has already peaked anyway in the United States. And so now you ask, what's going to be the new abnormal or the new normal, whatever you want to call it? I think people I think people at first will be reluctant to go out to a restaurant. I don't think anybody's starting a restaurant in New York City anytime soon. I do think there's going to be a lot of office closures, restaurant closures, store closures, and so on, just because they did not get their small business loans. They went out of business. They can't afford their rent. And again, the average restaurant in the US is only 16 days of cash, which means they're already bankrupt. Many of them are not getting small business loans because this 10 million restaurants, they only are going to give out loans to 2 or 3 million small businesses. So you're out of luck if you don't get one. Not everyone is getting one. They act like everyone's getting one. Not everyone's getting one. So again, I think at first there's going to be a weird new normal, but then I'm hoping, and again, this is where I don't know comes in. There's a lot of uncertainty. What I'm hoping for is that we're like drug addicts coming out of rehab. So when we first go to rehab, we're still addicted to our drugs. And then by the end of rehab, we say, oh, I'm never using drugs again. And then after a month or two, going back to your friends and going back to the same location, you start becoming a drug addict again. And so I'm hoping that the stimulus combined with that sort of rule of human behavior will kick in, and we'll start going to restaurants, we'll start having normal behavior again, and the stimulus will kick in, money will be flowing. And in terms of the money printing, the economy will probably spend about $3 trillion less this quarter. So this stimulus, for better or for worse, is just replacing that $3 trillion. And fortunately, again, countries around the world are willing to help us by still lending to us and purchasing our T-bills and so on. Everybody loves the U.S. dollar, fortunately, so that'll keep inflation pressure down. And the fact that we're just simply replacing dollars that would have been spent will keep inflation down. UBI, in the future, I mean, I do agree we probably needed it for these months just because nobody wanted to be out of work. So, yeah, the government should pay us to stay home. And fortunately, again, we have the kind of economy that can afford that. But long term, I don't know how you can justify affording that unless, I also sort of think we should start thinking about selling off US property. Like, why do we own all the highways? Why do the states and the federal government own the federal highways, the state highways, and so on? The states should start selling their public colleges before it's too late. Like, imagine if New York sold the whole SUNY system to somebody. They could probably get a decent price for it, but in 10 years, that SUNY system might be out of business. So I think that's another way the U.S. government can kind of the U.S. government should totally legalize marijuana to help, raise new taxes and from a new industry and help pay for the stimulus. And I think we'll start seeing, again, everything that was going to happen in 5 to 10 years anyway is going to happen within the next year. So marijuana is going to be legalized nationally. Colleges, people are going to start to really suspect, hey, is this worth it? Home ownership is a joke. You and I both know everybody who was like, I'm a proud New Yorker, they left New York the second there was one case of coronavirus in New York. So the whole home ownership wasn't anything. And by the way, what's going to happen to real estate prices? Nobody's going to be that eager to move into an expensive apartment in New York City, knowing that the second wave of coronavirus might hit any day, and they're going to have to abandon their homes again. So I think real estate's going to be in flux for a while as well.
All right, James Altucher, everybody. Check him out, the James Altucher Show. It's a podcast. Also follow him on Twitter. I do. Follow him on social media. Check out his books. James, great to talk to you, man. Come back and hang with us soon.
Yeah, Buck, anytime. Thanks for having me on the show.
It is time for roll call. Thank you so much, everybody, for writing in. I always appreciate it. It helps us out to hear from all of you across the country and let us know what's going on with all of the things, all of you. So as always, thank you so much for that. Let's get to it, shall we? Well, first, let's check in with our friend, Producer Mark. Producer Mark, how are you doing? What's at the top of the Netflix queue? How's life in the penalty box, but the home penalty box?
There's a lot of questions there. I'm not really sure how to go there.
Yeah, you take them as they come. You take them as you want.
No, I'm doing well. I'm into a routine of doing absolutely nothing and then coming and doing the show.
Right. Thank God we actually have a show to do every day. I mean, I've always been thankful for this show, but like if I wasn't doing this, let's say that there was a government ban on all home media for some reason, which would be crazy. But I'm just saying, if nobody was allowed to work from home, even doing media stuff, I'd go nuts, man. I would have read 3 or 4 books in the first like week or two of quarantine, and then I would have just been, I don't know. There's only so much cooking you can do too, because I cook food that's delicious, and then I want to eat it, and I'm going to turn it into Job of the Buck. So there are limitations.
Yeah, I'm going nuts even with spending 8 hours or so on the show every day. It feels like you consume my life now, Buck. That's all I do.
I know. You can say it, Producer Mark. I complete you.
Not going that far, Buck.
It's all right. With Tallulah, man, I gotta say, I've never been so thankful to have a little furry companion. It's just nice to have. I mean, if I didn't have her, all I've got here is a plant, and it's not a plant that I think is gonna be. Hopefully it lasts through this pandemic. I'm not great at keeping the plant alive. The dog, I'm very good at feeding, because if I don't, she lets me know that my culinary efforts are not up to par. And
no one will think you're going crazy because you're talking to the dog, not to yourself.
That's true too. I mean, I do talk to the dog a lot now. I will say that occasionally I have to make sure that the mic is off in here, because I find myself making up songs to sing to the dog. Like, that's how you know those old videos where they got guys who are in prison and they'll be like 25 bottles of beer on the wall. There's all that. I'm kind of at that phase, except I'm singing songs to the dog.
Just out of curiosity, do you think I just sit here in my living room and listen to see if I can hear you all day?
No, but I'm just paranoid. If anybody heard me singing, they'd be like, I think this guy's out of his mind.
That's a good point. I'd be more worried about your neighbors than the microphone, though.
No, that's definitely true. The neighbors. And I've got a neighbor upstairs, and he does cough sometimes. And I'll tell you this. I hear that cough, and I go, oh, boy.
What's worse, a cough or a loud bass from upstairs? Because I have the bass problem.
What is it with people not understanding that bass travels right through floors and walls and ceilings, and it's annoying. Very disruptive.
Like, I have a sound bar. I turned the bass off because I didn't want to annoy my neighbors.
I will tell you that I had a very terse exchange with a neighbor in the Freedom Hut, or he's a neighbor to the Freedom Hut, I should say, and I had to go downstairs, and initially he wanted me to do the whole, well, was it just loud 10 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago? And I just was like, dude, it's too blanking loud. I don't want to have to come down here again. It's one of those conversations. So
yeah, I just let my landlord deal with it.
It's probably
and right now I don't want to go talk to random people, with a mask on, all that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just lucky that he didn't probably look at me and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my music was too loud." It's all you have to do right now.
You go running.
I'm going to say that, look, if someone comes up to you on the street, especially in New York, because we're not really allowed to be armed at all, which is appalling, but we're not. If someone comes up to you on the street and they say, give me all your money, you let off a real hacking cough in their face. Well, hopefully if you don't want to do this, they have a gun because that might end up very badly. But if they're just threatening to like beat you up, they'll probably run away. I wouldn't fight somebody who was coughing right now. I don't care what the circumstances were.
I don't think I'd fight somebody who was coughing, period. Anytime.
Yeah, but particularly now.
Yes.
All right. Graham writes, on the subway spread thesis, which makes sense to me. Are we seeing... Oh, yes, Graham, this was written about, by the way, last Wednesday in the New York Post. That is actually where the story was broken, just in case any of you were wondering. It was a New York Post story about an MIT study, and I cited the author here on the show. And I want to hat tip and thank the New York Post for putting that story out there so that we could all use spread this academic research far and wide in a way that is useful for the national and ongoing conversation. So high five, New York Post. Hat tip. But yes, you're right. Are we seeing similar issues in San Francisco or other cities with high utilization of public transit, Chicago, Seattle, etc.? I know no U.S. city really compares to New York City, but aren't there a few that kind of do? We are not seeing it yet from what I understand, but remember, the New York City subway is in a category by itself. When you look at the numbers and the frequency of ridership, there's nothing that's even close across the nation. I mean, it really is between, it's a few million rides a day. A few million. Think about that. It's someone like me, for a while there at the beginning of this year, I was in the subway 4 times a day. I mean, producer Mark will tell you, I was actually on the subway 4 separate trips a day. So because if you try to drive around Manhattan, if you're on any kind of a time crunch or schedule, you're just going to sit in traffic all day. I mean, for hits for different cable news shows, I'll tell you a little bit of insidery stuff. They send this isn't like cool insidery stuff, but they'll send a car for you usually. That's the one perk if you're unpaid, which most of the people you see on TV are not by these big cable networks, or a lot of the people, I should say, are not. The hosts obviously are, and the correspondents are. If they call someone a contributor, that means they're getting paid. If you're just a guest, they're like, hey, it's Buck. Let's let Buck talk. But you could sit in a car from my house to Fox News. You can walk in 15 minutes or so, or you could sit in a car, and it might take you 30 minutes to get there, maybe 40. I mean, you could just get stuck. So that's why everyone's on the subway all the time. I have not seen any data looking at other cities and their spread, but I just know off the top of my head that there's nowhere else. I mean, the DC Metro is like a tiny fraction of the New York City Metro system. And because it's a tiny fraction, you have to remember that MIT study published in the New York Post was pointing out that it's about the density on the subway car as well as the duration of the subway ride. And look, maybe the theory's wrong. And you know what I'll do? I'm going to look around. I'm sure there's some theories now trying to debunk it out there. Maybe it is debunked in some way. But it certainly makes sense when you look at the hot spots. And I've been talking about the subway all along as a major problem here. And there's a reason why producer Mark and I both started staying off of mass transit when this thing really spiraled out of control. But so the answer, Graham, is I got to look into it. I don't have a good answer for you. JJ, I just want to say something about the whole snitch sitch in Garcettiville. As of a year ago, the city of Los Angeles was running a $1 billion deficit, yet somehow he thinks he can afford to pay people to rat on those who aren't properly social distancing. I mean, the taxes on pot sales are approximately 50%, but I have no idea how he intends to foot this bill. Also, I don't know if you have heard about this, but Garcetti has simply started taking over hotel properties and using them for the homeless. I have heard about that. Furthermore, Comrade Newsom, I like this guy, JJ. Comrade Newsom has also started shaming other cities and counties for not following his example. While I live near Los Angeles, the hotel I work at thankfully is still in Orange County and has not yet been endangered by this reckless, fiscally irresponsible policy. Given that the situation does not fall under eminent domain, how can Garcetti or anyone else justify the seizure of property? Who will pay to have the hotel staffed and policed? Who will pay to have the properties deep cleaned and sanitized, sterilized, if they can actually evict the homeless squatters after the crisis abates? I'm a born and raised Californian, but I am seriously fed up. Sadly, I'm not in a position financially to be able to move, but we'll definitely start a fund toward that goal as soon as may be. Well, JJ, you've always got a home in the hut, my friend. Great note. Thank you so much for writing into us. And I don't have answers. You're asking great questions. I don't have answers. I don't pretend, unlike some other smarmy, self-important, and nasty radio hosts, I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just have a lot of them. And as for Garcetti and how he's going to justify this, we're seeing a lot of government power that's taken into people's hands right now where the only justification is because I said so. That should be troubling for people. That's a troubling precedent for the government to set, isn't it? We should think of this and think of what it really means when the government can do that. It is a concern that we should all share. All right, more roll call. Justin. Hey there, Buck and Mark. The interview with Jack Carr the other day got me thinking of comments you've made several times. Buck, you really need to get your pistol permit. Living in Massachusetts, I know it's not always an easy process, but that is definitely by design. Like so many other lib tactics, they actually use the process as the punishment. Suck it up and get it done. You'll thank me later, I promise. Stay healthy and safe in lockdown. Justin, you are 100% correct, and I don't have a good excuse. My excuse is that the process is the punishment. I can tell you that when I moved from D.C. to New York this past summer, I did print out the New York City pistol permit application and then I just got distracted and I was like, I don't have time for this right now. But I mean, I've been thinking about it. I know people who have successfully done it. It is possible. It's really just a premise permit. To get your concealed carry here is very complicated and not easy to do and usually gets denied unless you're connected, unless you're somebody who's, hooked up. So, yeah, that's where it's at, my friend. You're correct, Justin. I should have a pistol permit here in New York City, and when I do, which won't really be able to happen because I don't think I'm going to wait in a long line at One Police Plaza right now. Although maybe there are no lines at One Police. Maybe it's like the easiest time ever. One Police Plaza is the big NYPD headquarters here. It looks like something that was built as like the KGB's interrogation headquarters. It's the ugliest building you've ever seen in your life. Definitely not Art Deco as our Tribeca headquarters for iHeartMedia is, which producer Mark pointed out some time ago because he's apparently on the side an architecture enthusiast.
Yeah, big architecture enthusiast, even though the only architecture I see right now is the inside of my apartment building.
Well, do you have any kind of you got a view? Can you see water or something?
Yeah, there's like a swamp. And some train tracks.
Do you have Meadowlands kind of view?
Yeah, Meadowlands type of view, and I get a lot of train horns. You would be driven nuts because there's a train horn every 5 to 10 minutes.
When I lived in college, where I was in college for 1 year was 50 yards from an active railroad track, and at 3
I don't
o'clock in the morning.
understand why they blow the horn. There's no gate crossing here. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I don't know. They just do it, I guess. Look, if you're a train engineer, and I'm sure, like everything, there's always like a train engineer list. There's always somebody who's an actual expert on whatever I'm talking about listening to this show. I'll never forget when I misidentified an aspect of like Wiccan theology. I got a long email about that. Not messing with the Wiccans. The folks are all great. I just didn't know. But a train engineer, I feel like if you're the train engineer, come on, you're going to want to go, it's like being, when you ask a trucker to hit the horn for you when you're a kid, to do the big horn, what do you call that thing? I don't know. The pull down horn or just the horn. Yeah. Yeah. I think if you're a train engineer, you just want to let it rip, right?
Sure, but can you do it somewhere else? I get it's the busiest corridor of rail travel in the country, but do it somewhere else, not near an apartment building.
You may or may not. I think I've talked about this before here, but you may or may not know that I've gone deep down the rabbit hole of why we have backup machine sound all over the country. This, beep 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 that we all have to hear all the time, and sometimes it'll be for like the equivalent of like an outdoor Zamboni machine or something. It's going like 3 miles an hour. No one's going to get hit by this thing, but they still have to because of the OSHA. It's an OSHA regulation, Occupational Safety Hazard Administration, or whatever the actual acronym is. And it stretches back to the 70s when someone came up with this idea that we all have to have these noisemakers. Do you know what ends up happening in most cases when someone actually is hit by a car or a truck that's backing up? You know what they find out? That the person heard the noise, but they're so used to hearing it, they didn't pay attention. So it doesn't matter. This is, anyway, I'll never forget when I was in college. This kid was a hero. This kid was a hero. When I was in college, because Amherst was very progressive and very left-wing, and I lived right on the town green there. So I lived near the train tracks one time. Then I lived near the town green, which was very fancy. But it was all college housing. But I mean, it was the nice part of the college to live in. But there was a crosswalk thing that would do the you have 20 seconds to cross. 19, 18. So, I mean, it was the dumbest thing, and it would go 24/7.
That at least makes sense because blind people need to be able to cross the street.
Now I feel like Seinfeld when he's saying that,
the dermatologist.
Thanks. Now I feel like a jerk. But I'm just saying, I remember some kids, and I'm sure they were hungover, and it was, or actually they were drunk, not hungover, but it was the middle of the night. And I remember seeing them from my window, and I knew who they were. They were lacrosse players. This one kid, actually, the other kid was standing on the corner, and he ran across the street with a golf putter and just mauled the little, you have 19 seconds, just bashed the thing in. It was like, whoa.
It's always the lax bros.
The lax bros are a crazy bunch. But, man, I slept so much better for the few weeks it took them to actually come back with, town services to fix that thing. It was fantastic. Fantastic.
And a bunch of blind people couldn't cross the street.
There were no fatalities in the crosswalk. There were 10 people living in the town. But, yeah, now I do. I didn't think about thanks, producer Mark. I didn't think about that aspect of it. All right. Bill. Sir, where will you be in North Carolina for your speech? I would like to attend and pass the word amongst my people. Really enjoy your show. Bill, the speech, assuming that we're allowed to hold it by state regulation, which we think we will, but that is an if right now, will be in Craven County, North Carolina. So that's where I'll be giving a speech. And I hope everybody will show up. Craven County GOP will be hosting, and it's going to be quite an event, man. We are going to let it rip that night. Eric. Buck, reading Porter's article in American Consequences left me reminiscing on early Investment Hour episodes. Still a great show with Dan Ferris, but to be honest, the Porter-Buck combo was about as epic as podcasts get. Any chance you could get Porter on for an interview? Eric, I'm going to tell you, this is the truth. During this show, in one of our breaks, I got a text from my man Porter Stansberry, because we talk all the time, and I said, Porter, we got to get you on this show. So the answer is yes, and I'm not... I swear I got it before you even asked. So we must have some kind of mind meld here or something. We'll get Porter Stansberry on, and we'll do a longer form with him, too. I hope you've all been... Producer Mark, where should people go to hear the podcast extras, to watch our videos? Please tell them where to promote the things.
The podcast extras are the same place you get this podcast. It'll come in the same RSS feed, so everywhere, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, all that. And on YouTube, it'll be youtube.com/Buck Sexton.
There we go. Please subscribe. Also share what we're putting out there so people can see it. Tell other family members. That's a great way to expand Team Buck, and we really appreciate it every time you can do that. And, we're going to be doing some long form with Porter. We have James Altucher today. We had Ted Nugent. We got a lot of people in the queue. It's going to be fantastic. Team, stay strong, stay safe, shields high.